Welcome back to the Sapphic Gaze podcast. I am your host, Nisa, and as always, with me is my co host and partner, but not in a gay way, Ellie. And we are discussing enemies to lovers today. How's it going, Ellie?
I'm all good. I'm excited to discuss some enemies. I've got my list in front of me, and I feel like it's one of those tropes that I don't talk about enough.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to say right off the bat, this is one of my favorite tropes. And I think for me, at least, the reason it really resonates is just because so much of the enemies to lovers trope can be represented across like a huge spectrum. Because you can have anything from there was a misunderstanding and we don't like each other, all the way up into like there was a war and we're on the opposite sides of said war and we fucking hate each other. And so I think across that, with those two ends of the spectrum, there's a lot of interesting ground you can cover in there. It gives a really great starting point for conflict, which I feel like every book needs some sort of conflict. So it really just embeds that conflict right into it and really sets the stage. Plus, the sexual tension in an enemies to lovers is always like some of the best sexual tension I read.
I feel like you and we both love Ribbonwood.
Oh, yes.
And I feel like Ribbonwood is the perfect example of sexual tension built to perfection.
Oh, yes. Yes. We're just going to jump right into it, aren't we?
Oh, yes, we are. I have all the time in the world for Ruby.
Yeah. So Ruby Landers and Ribbonwood, great story, great enemies to lovers story. For those who haven't read it, quick summary, Lara Bennett is infamous within the town and she is just no good. She is the worst of the worst. She is the villain of the town.
She's a massive homewrecker. Everyone despises her.
Exactly. If something's going wrong, it's probably her fault. And then you have Ollie Gabrielli, who seems to be universally loved by this town. And of course, these two women, with it being such a small town, knew each other in high school. It doesn't seem like they had a contentious relationship a little bit, but it seems more rivals, if anything.
Yeah, they were in opposite cliques, weren't they? Weren't they like kind of like jock and the popular girl?
Exactly. Or at least that's how Ollie perceived them, because that's not how Lara Bennett perceived it. But I think that's kind of the great jumping off point is Ollie has to come back to town. And so coming back to town and bumping back into the infamous Lara Bennett really sets the stage for a great enemies to lovers trope. So do you want to start us off talking about what you loved about it? Because I could go all day long talking about all the ways in which I love this book.
Yeah, I mean, same. I loved that Lara is just a little misunderstood gem. And I think this book has one of the strongest opening lines of any book that I've read thus far. It basically just introduces Lara as this home-wrecking, backstabbing, no good hussy. That's how you're led to believe she is. And you spend a good, I don't know, maybe first quarter of the book thinking, yeah, okay, this is why we hate her. She does this, this, and this. And of course, it's from everyone else's perspective. And then you actually introduce Ollie, and Ollie thinks, why has she got such a bad rap? And Ollie's like, I'm going to figure her out. And you go on this journey of discovering who Lara is outside these rumours and outside this gossip, and you kind of get to know that she's this wonderful character with so many layers and such depth. And I love Lara as a character, and I love the way Ollie and her build a relationship.
I agree. And I think it was kind of criminal that we didn't bring up Lara Bennett in our Ice Queens episode, because boy, is that what she's kind of painted out to be. Like, she is just the villain of everybody's story, and finding that, you know, underneath the layers, she is like this great human being, and having Ollie really do the work to try and to get into that and understand that, I think is really great to see. But also I think what makes this a really great one is because they utilize the split perspective, where you do see, you know, a couple chapters from Ollie's point of view, then you see a couple from Lara's point of view. And so it's really great to be like, oh wow, you know, Lara actually kind of sees Ollie as the villain a little bit too here because she was a jock. Everybody loved her, and it's just an interesting dynamic to see play out just because so much of their tension and animosity towards one another comes from rumors and how they perceive each other. And you would think, especially for Lara, that she would be able to see past like that perception, seeing as she is villainized so harshly by everybody, but she knows that's not who she truly is. So you would think she would have been able to have seen past that perception for Ollie, but it takes her a little bit to get there.
Just like half the book.
I have to pull this up just because you had said it has one of the best opening lines. There aren't too many small towns that would band together and say a woman deserved to be widowed, but Ribbonwood was that town and Lara Bennett was that woman. Damn. Damn. Yeah, I do think that pretty much sets the stage for what everybody thinks about Lara Bennett.
Oh, it was such a strong line. I remember reading it and I was like, I'm gonna love this.
Everybody's like, yeah, I know she has a kid, and yes, you know, she did just get widowed, but good, screw her.
She probably killed him herself.
Exactly.
I feel like Ruby Landers is just, I mean, obviously she's an amazing author, but she does do enemies to lovers so well.
She does. I think, I mean, it's a masterclass, truly, Ribbonwood in enemies to lovers. So good for so many reasons.
What other enemies to lovers did you enjoy?
No Shelter But the Stars by Virginia Black, another great novel. And then G. Benson with Purposefully Accidental. I'm not saying, again, I want to make it clear, anytime I throw these out there, I'm not ranking it based on the book itself, but based on the trope that it depicts. And I think those are some really good highlights of enemies to lovers. What about yourself?
I've got Chemistry, which we've already discussed, by Rachel Summers, The Snowball Effect by Haley Cass, and The Summer of Our Discontent.
Oh, yes.
I can't believe that didn't make it to your list.
I do have it on my list as far as ones that I enjoyed, but it wasn't my top. But it's an adorable enemies to lovers trope.
Yeah, I feel like it's similar to Ribbonwood in the sense that they both hated each other from school.
Exactly. I think with The Summer of Our Discontent, the thing I think that's really funny is because whereas in Ribbonwood, they had time to get away from the town and really kind of grow out of it, or they should have, but they didn't. They held on to it. Summer of Our Discontent, they stay in that town and they just start to divide the town just by their own little rivalry that they have. Because one of them's a police officer and one of them's a firefighter. And so they already have like that built-in like culture that I feel like that's a trope in and of itself. Firefighters and then the police force not liking each other. And so just by them each choosing one side, they further divide it.
Yeah, they chose their careers just to piss each other off.
Like they did.
Oh, it is a cracking book though. I feel like comedy-wise, that's probably one of the funniest books I've read.
Oh yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, she has some great timing too with some of her jokes that she writes, which I feel like that's really tough.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of them as well are from, where is it?
Louisiana.
Yes, and I feel like it just, especially because I listen to a lot of her books on audiobook, and Laurie Prince tends to narrate them, and her accents are incredible. Like, my god, she does a southern accent like no one's business.
I haven't switched over to audio just because, you know, how my ADHD is. If I'm not like looking at a book, I'm all over the place.
I think it depends. Like, I am probably 30% audiobook, 70% Kindle.
This is how a Kindle works?
Mine does. I have the cover on it.
For those only listening, the hand gesture that we just made for Kindle was opening a physical book, like paper, whereas I think we can all agree a flat hand is a Kindle.
Well, I actually heard something terrifying. Slight side note. They asked a bunch of elementary school kids to pretend that they're on the phone, and all of them held up a flat palm to their ear. Is that not the most terrifying thing you've ever heard?
I mean, it's just showing how old we are getting.
How would you do it?
Same way as you, when you put your thumb and your pinky out and make the phone, because that's what we had. No. So throwing this out there to make it even more terrifying, I asked my son to show me, and you know, my son is 4. So I've asked my son to do that, and he actually holds up his whole hand in a C motion and holds it to his face so that the C is cupping his cheek. So it's like he's holding an actual phone to his face.
I mean, that's incredibly smart when you think about it. Okay, what about ones that we think didn't work very well?
Okay, so I'll kick us off on that. We already talked about it in an earlier episode. Requiem for Immortals, I did not think was a very good enemies to lovers. And this one's controversial because it is by one of our favorite authors, The Love Conspiracy.
I didn't even consider The Love Conspiracy.
How did you not?
Don't know. I mean, to be fair, I feel like if you slept with my husband, I would consider you an enemy.
Yes, exactly. If you are my husband's mistress, we are not going to be friends. Well, actually, you know what? I take that back. If you slept with my husband, we are going to be friends because dudes. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Are we saying Ryan and Requiem were enemies?
I mean, the whole premise of that is Requiem is given her name as somebody she is supposed to kill. And that's what our jumping off point is. And so you say, okay, well, obviously Ryan didn't know that they were enemies, but the second she finds out who Requiem is, she is hard on that. Like, I need to bring you in. I have like an obligation to try and bring you in because of who you are. I've done all this research. I know who you are. Like, I think you'd have to classify it as an enemies to lovers, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I was thinking more like victim and prey.
I could see that. Predator and prey. But it does have an inflection point when Ryan gets the full picture of who Natalia is and that Natalia is Requiem.
Yeah, no, okay, I get that. Yeah, Requiem, we both know it's not our favourite book.
No.
And if you want to hear our spiel about that, you can listen to the Ice Queen episode.
Yeah. So what about you, if you're not classifying those straight up as enemies to lovers?
I'm going for, controversially, they're both medical books.
Of course.
The Fifth Surgeon and Heart Failure. The Fifth Surgeon is the one that I talk about often. The one, I can't give it away, it's a massive spoiler. The one I moan about a lot.
Yeah. Give me a quick summary without spoiling it for myself or the listeners.
It's tricky to give you a Cliff Note version without giving you the spoiler, but I'm going to do my best. So Nadia is, I suppose, what you would consider like an ice queen.
Okay.
But she's like ice queen adjacent. She's a soft ice queen. And she works in hospital, and then one of her colleagues called Ashley is Nadia's chief. And I think there's just basically like workplace dynamic drama, that kind of thing. They start to fall for one another, and then Nadia reveals something massive. And basically, I was like, you are a bad person. Ashley deserves better. And I think that's why, for me, it didn't work as an enemies to lover, because the romance just fell apart for me at that point.
So I guess thinking about the enemies to lovers trope, what, aside from like just specifically that the romance fell apart, what actually like triggers you to not like an enemies to lovers trope?
I think there's a couple of things. If it's unnecessary enemy drama. Oh, try and say that 5 times quick. Unnecessary enemy drama. I think if, for example, you're told that they're enemies and they've always hated each other, but there's no real basis to why they actually hate each other, I just think what's the point of making them enemies in the first place? A good example of this is, it's a zombie book I read, and I remember recommending it to you.
Is it Charon at the Docks?
Yes, that one. So that is a really, really strong enemies to lovers book. I mean, strong enemies, not a strong book, although it's a good book, but they hate each other, and I mean pure despise, and it never really gets resolved. They end up becoming lovers, but there's still so much hatred in their relationship, and I'm just kind of like, bearing in mind it is set during a zombie apocalypse and the world's falling apart and everything's terrible, so they have that to contend with, which is maybe why they're a little bit miserable in the first place. But they are cruel to one another, and I think it's Genevieve in particular. It's just physically and verbally abusive throughout the entire story, and they fall in love, well, their version of love, but I didn't buy it.
Yeah, I got you there. That makes sense. But I'm going to throw this one out there. Since we've read a couple now zombie Sapphic books, I don't even know if you could chalk that up to the zombie element and the world falling apart, because like I recently read Dead Les Walking. And they're not specifically enemies to lovers. We have a complicated past to lovers in the zombie apocalypse, but I don't think it like bridges into anybody as cruel. And then, of course, a book that we both loved, Hearing Red, also doesn't cross the line into cruelty. So I don't think you can even say all of that has to do with just the zombie of it all. Because there are ways you can write it so that your characters aren't straight up abusive or cruel to one another.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where a couple of the ones I've noted fall apart. You can be an enemy of someone without being just vindictive and nasty. You can dislike someone based on like a petty squabble, or even like Guava Flavored Lies by J.J. Arias. Yeah, they are sworn enemies because of a pastry feud between their families. And yes, I said pastry. They argue about who has the original recipe for what are they called?
Is it pasados? No. Pastelitos? No. I don't know. They're kind of like empanadas, but not. It's the Cuban version of empanadas. Hold on. Now I need to look it up. Our listeners are going to hate us.
They're going to be screaming, going, "You actual twats, what are you talking about?"
I don't know if they're going to be saying that because some of them might be American and we don't really say that, so.
Do you not? It's such a good word. But yeah, their whole enemies is based on like a family feud. And I feel like that's a legitimate reason to be someone's enemy.
Why does the Goodreads summary not actually say it? It says about pastries. Damn. Well, I'm not opening up the book, so that seems like a lot of work for me. And as we know, I don't like to do that.
Somebody, well, I'm sure, will let us know in the comments what it was.
Exactly.
But yeah, I feel like that was a good basis for an enemy background. As in, like, you have literal feuding families.
It's kind of like, Romeo and Juliet, but with pastries.
It's literally that. I'm pretty sure I wrote exactly that in my review.
Which actually kind of brings me to one that I really enjoyed, No Shelter But the Stars, which is Romeo and Juliet in space, and where also Romeo is a woman. So
that's where you were going. I thought you were going to try and link it to pastries.
No. Yes, they make pastries from rocks.
Yeah, during a storm in space.
But No Shelter But the Stars, Virginia Black, love that as an enemies to lovers because I think it's one of the few that I have read where it doesn't start from like, oh, well, we were childhood rivals and now we're kind of trying to overcome that. It starts from that far end of the spectrum where they are in a literal war. And Davia, she is part of the imperial structure. They are overseeing like the entire universe basically at this point. And then on the opposite end you have Kieran, who's the last remaining daughter of the royalty of her people, and so she is literal princess. So you have a literal princess and a literal princess on both sides of the spectrum. One is on the rebel side, one is on the empire's side, if we're gonna go with a Star Wars reference there. And so they are in the middle of a firefight within space, and Kieran gets shot down and Davia does as well, and they end up both on this same planet. And so you have these two people from nations or planets that just literally hate each other. And not only are they just citizens in this war, but they are at the higher echelons of royalty. So throwing them together, there are a few scenes where I do think they're going to kill each other just because they don't speak the same language. They know that they're enemies. They hate each other like to their core. And it's just one of those where it's really interesting to see how they overcome that and really get to a point of understanding and how they grow through that experience.
It took them a while.
Yes, it was a very long time. It was over the span of months, almost.
I want to say nearly a year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it might have been nearly a year where they were trying to work towards this. And I think that's kind of why it's also rewarding to see, is because it did take so much work and we got to go along for that journey to see how you go from being basically at each other's throats quite literally to now we are like completely in love with one another.
Yeah. I want to reread that. I read it really quickly. I feel like I didn't give it the proper focus it needed.
I mean, and to be fair, science fiction isn't everybody's cup of tea. Although I don't know if we can say cup of tea just because cup of teas aren't your cup of tea, but
I love tea. Don't unmask me as a fake Brit, Lisa.
You are a fake Brit, though. I'm sorry. I did go off track there. I just needed to give a shout out to No Shelter But the Stars. I don't think it gets enough love, and I think it is because a lot of people hear it and they think, oh, it's science fiction, but it
Mhm.
actually doesn't lean as heavy on the science fiction once you get out of like the initial setup.
Yeah. I would say it's a cross between Romeo and Juliet, The Martian, and Battlestar Galactica.
I'd say that's a fair assessment.
I'm not a massive sci-fi fan, but I still really enjoyed it.
I think the trope that it ends up being is like that close proximity trope where they're stranded together.
One bed on one planet.
There is only one bed on the planet, actually.
It takes the whole force proximity to a whole new level.
Exactly. You are the literal only person on this planet.
What's that phrase? I wouldn't date you if you were the last man on Earth.
Davia wouldn't date Kieran if she was the last woman on the planet. Except she does.
Because love.
Exactly. Love.
Are there any others on your didn't work so well list?
The love conspiracy, which again, I know isn't like a straightforward enemies to lovers, but I mean, the whole premise of the love conspiracy starts out with Veronica confronting Allie at her yoga studio, asking about why she's having an affair with her husband. And that's where we start. I honestly think Veronica was viewing it very much as we are enemies right now.
Yeah.
They turn into quick allies. But for me, this is what I'm going to throw out there. I don't think there is a world in which Veronica, a woman who got cheated on by her husband, falls for Allie, a woman who slept with her husband. Now, all credit to Allie. She did not know that she was with a married man, but I don't see this alliance forming at all.
No. I could imagine maybe like a passable indifference to your husband's mistress.
Exactly. But it's one of those where they form an alliance for vengeance. Veronica is all fire and brimstone, but Allie seems like she's coming at it more from hurt, and she doesn't even seem like she's fully bought into the vengeance aspect of it, really. She's like along for the ride begrudgingly. And so I don't think it's one of those where they would form that quick alliance, but then more to the point, I don't see them if I see them hooking up or getting together, I wonder, is it because they're trying to like have some sort of vengeance on the cheating man of it all? But they're also kind of trauma bonded at this point because they both got cheated on by the same dude. And I don't know how that plays out for enemies to lovers.
Yeah, I don't think it translates very well in that trope. I'd say age gap wise, if we take that out of it, it could be a really good age gap book.
But again, you're trauma bonded. So how does that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a sticky one.
And especially too, because if I recall correctly, Allie relies on the I don't remember what his fucking name was. Douchebag.
The douche.
The douche. She's reliant on him because didn't he buy their house for them? Like, I know he's got money, or he had given money to help her business get off the ground. Like, I know there's some semblance of support there that he is providing monetarily. And so that's where I say is, I don't know if you could make it a really good age gap, because like we had said in that age gap episode, there's that power dynamic where you got to question, okay, well, now she's lost all of this extra money. Is she relying on Veronica solely because Veronica also has money?
No.
Well, no, she's not, but I'm just saying.
I get what you mean.
Yeah.
Heart Failure did not do it for me because the main character, Jess, was just unlikable. And I feel like a lot of people would disagree with that, but I just think she was just incredibly selfish as a character. And they started off at odds because basically Jess is a really hardworking doctor and she just had a baby and she goes home to her mum's house because she has heart failure, as the book suggests. So she needs to take time off work. And then she meets Lena. And Lena is sunshine. Lena is the most selfless, caring, considerate, just wonderful woman I've read in a book. Okay, that's a bit of a tall tale. One of them. And I just think Lena deserves so much better. Jess just treated her horribly. And they argued so much in the beginnings. So they were enemies. And they reluctantly became lovers.
So I guess, does it fail because she was just a horrible person, or does it actually come from like the structure as enemies and not making the proper transition to lovers?
No, it fails because she's a horrible person. For me personally. Because don't get me wrong, I think structure-wise it was done really well. Like Jess's perspective was she hated Lena because she thought Lena was using her mum and was trying to basically get written into the will and was taking advantage of her elderly mother. Lena, of course, wasn't, and then they had to go on this whole journey to prove that she wasn't taking advantage and that she was actually just a really decent person. And I just think that Jess just treated her really poorly.
Gotcha. I guess that's where I say, like, for me, I don't want to say I can overlook a douche of a human being, but for me, I would almost classify that as a failing from a narrative standpoint and character construction versus a failing of the trope. Because I mean, like thinking about how I had kind of thrown out Requiem and Love Conspiracy, like I think something characteristic of enemies to lovers is that you need to set it up so that it's not a bridge too far to cross where you completely make them so large of enemies that they couldn't see past those differences. And I feel like in like the case of Requiem or Love Conspiracy, both of those I felt like was just a bridge too far. Like you could not tell me that a cop is gonna go for an assassin or that, you know, a woman is gonna want to be with her husband's mistress.
It's weird, I struggle more with the mistress element than the assassin.
You know what? I can accept assassin, but I can't accept a mistress.
Genuinely. Like, I think about, like, Killing Eve. I think I'd be more inclined to date Villanelle than I would date my husband's mistress.
Okay, this is gonna make me a really, really bad Sapphic, but I've only seen one episode of Killing Eve.
It's also going to make me a bad Sapphic that I haven't finished the last series.
I heard that people weren't happy with how that one ended, though, so...
That's why I stopped. I love the series. It's brilliant. The writing is excellent. But I haven't finished the last series because it got, like, slammed. And I was like, I would rather remember it as it was.
I feel like that happens in a lot of media, though, to be fair.
Yeah, I don't want to be disappointed. I'm just going to finish it there and then I can choose my own happy ending.
Is that one that also had you know, spoiler alert, but isn't that one that also had a kill your gays or bury your gays trope going on? That's what I had heard.
I did read somewhere, like, and it was an article back when I was watching Orphan Black for the first time. And it was like, why can the gays never get a happy ending?
Ah, yes, because of the fake out that wasn't a fake out, but then became a fake out because of the uproar.
Yeah, I was telling Nisa that the Cophine community rioted when they killed off Delphine in season 3. And that's not a spoiler because if you haven't watched it yet, what are you doing? It's been years.
I know. It's been literally like 10 years.
Yeah, the gays protested and said, like, you've just killed off the only gay couple, and to what end? And so we all said we were going to boycott the series, and they brought her back.
Wasn't technically the only gay couple because Felix and Colin, but
I don't count that as a couple purely because Colin was an off-screen partner. He was in, like, what, 1 episode?
he was in like 3, and I mean he comes back in the audio drama. Like they are together.
Yeah, but I'm like, you didn't see them as, apart from, like, holding hands and, like, a throw line here and there, you didn't see them as a couple.
I mean, there was a scene where literally they're about to hook up and people bust through Felix's door. Like, I'm pretty sure Colin throws up his hands and he's got lube on his hands. Do you not remember this? For anyone who's listening, Ellie just chose to take a drink at that exact second, so sorry about that. Do you need a pause?
Oh my god. The visions that just conjured up in my mind. Oh no. No, I do not remember that. I've probably, that's probably, I feel like I've got water up my nose.
You probably do.
Thank you for that. That image of a gay man with lube all over his mouth.
I said his hands. Oh my god.
What?
It's got on his mouth.
One eternity later.
Okay, we were talking about how the gays don't ever get a happy ending.
Yeah, that's a whole episode unto itself.
Yeah, Jesus.
I feel like that's part of the reason why we're so, at least in Sapphic writing, they are so hesitant to not give a happy ending is because how exclusionary mass media is, or mainstream media is, towards the Sapphic community. Because gay men get their happy endings quite frequently. Not always, but quite frequently. There have been a few Sapphic relationships that got happy endings, but I feel like that's really new.
Yeah, I can't even think of. I mean, obviously, Cosima and Delphine from Orphan Black.
But with great protest. I mean, we're getting off topic. Enemies to lovers. Actually, on topic, Cosima and Delphine, enemies to lovers.
Yeah.
Don't make that face.
Were they enemies?
I mean, a monitor that works for Dyad falls in love with one of the test subjects. So maybe not so much from Delphine's point of view, but from Cosima, I mean, the Sestras, you gotta admit, view Dyad as the big bad, so they are very much anti-Dyad.
Yeah, Cosima went through a phase she just did not like Delphine. You cannot convince me otherwise.
Oh yeah, like when the big reveal was that she was the monitor, even though Cosima had to have known.
Yeah, she said it herself, didn't she? Pretty sure she had a conversation with Sarah.
Yeah, she said she knew, and Sarah had said to be careful, and then Cosima was like, obviously I'll be careful.
Jumps into bed with her.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what I do anytime I encounter somebody I think is trying to control my DNA, just jump right into bed.
I'd actually be really interested to see if any Sapphic books have been inspired by Cosima and Delphine, or if they started out as a fan fiction for them.
There has to be at least a couple with a couple as iconic as those two. I would imagine there has to be some out there. I mean, I feel like, to be fair, a lot of Sapphic authors have their start in fan fiction.
Yeah, because we write the stories we want to see for our characters.
Exactly, and mainstream media, and even, I don't think you would consider books necessarily to be mainstream, but even like books, we don't have that great of representation. Or if we have like Sapphic characters, a lot of times I feel like there's always a man thrown into it, which, I mean, obviously bisexuality exists. I won't say it doesn't because, there you are. But, not every woman wants a dude.
Yeah, I think that needs to be a topic we discuss at some point.
Well, of course.
The awful representation of bisexual characters in Sapphic books.
100%.
I literally had one. I told you once, it made me cry because of how poorly that representation was done.
I think I recall which one you are referring to.
Yeah, actually, it made me tear. I'm not emotional, like, I'm not someone that cries often, but that made me cry on holiday by the pool as I was reading it.
Oh, nobody wants to cry by the pool.
No, I know. It's right, I just jumped in the pool and it was just splendid. It's fine.
I can just see you in the pool like, it's just the pool water, I swear.
It's just the chlorine.
I'm so okay right now.
It was truly awful.
Oh, God.
We will discuss it on another episode.
Okay. I feel like we've got off topic, but I can't say I dislike it. We ended up talking about Delphine and Cosima, so not a bad day. Exactly.
I feel like as well, we always set topics for these podcasts, but we always interweave tropes in other episodes.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, this will not be the last you hear of us mentioning enemies to lovers. We will no doubt talk about them in other episodes.
I feel like it's just so difficult to not bring them up, just because so many books are rooted in like anywhere from 5 to 10 tropes, and it just gets regurgitated in different ways repeatedly.
Yeah, and if we have missed a blaringly obvious amazing enemies to lovers, I'm sure we will discuss it next time.
And gonna throw that one out there because we haven't brought it up in any other podcast, but I really want to know what like our listeners think about either, enemies to lovers or ice queens or age gaps, and if there are any books that we have missed, because always looking for a recommendation first and foremost. But I know that there's so many books out there that we just haven't been exposed to. And I think a good portion of it is just because when you think about publishing, there are so many independently published authors out there, especially in Sapphic romance, just because like a lot of the larger publishing houses aren't looking for our stories. And so, like you said, you write what you want to read, And so I feel like it's a great impetus for people to go out there and strike out on their own. But it does mean that a lot of great books don't get discovered. And so to the listeners, I do throw it back to you guys. Like, what do you like? What do you think makes any of these tropes effective? Or what have you read out there that's great? Or what is awful? Like, I'd really love to know.
So you are a massive Redditor, aren't you? Like, you love discussing books on Reddit.
I am huge on Reddit, but it's mostly for Sapphic books. That's how I discovered a lot of the books I've read, and it's kind of why one of our topics had come up, is because somebody was looking for like masculine representation, and that ended up not being something that was really out there. So yeah, I find a lot of my recommendations from Reddit.
Yeah, and we always want to hear them because my TBR list is never long enough.
I don't think you can have too many books on your TBR list.
No, for the first time just before Christmas, I had more read books than on my TBR, and it didn't feel right. The balance was wrong.
I'm pretty sure that's illegal. I don't know all the laws in all the countries, but it's got to be illegal in at least one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the UK, it will be somewhere.
Probably. Okay, so I mean, I feel like that's a really good end to kind of this segment. In summary, give us more enemies to lovers.
Yes.
Okay. So, to the listeners, if you liked what we said, if you hated what we said, make sure to let us know. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, all the different socials, because they're all out there. I think we have a TikTok too.
We do have a TikTok.
Like us, subscribe, and tune in next time, guys. Bye.